One, addressing the issue of hands-on PowerPoint. That would be a whole nother course all by itself of at least 10 hours. It takes a long time to become proficient with PowerPoint. It takes quite a bit of time to even get your mind around some of the things it will do. I've been working with PowerPoint or another program that is similar to PowerPoint that I replaced with PowerPoint about 15 years ago, simply because PowerPoint passed it in terms of capability. So I've been working on this for 20 plus years. So this is something that I've done for a while, and I tend to do more with PowerPoint than most people think that you can do with PowerPoint. I've had people see some of my PowerPoints and ask me what program I do it with, because they don't realize you can do those things with PowerPoint. I'm not saying that about me, I'm saying that about the program. It's just capable of a lot more than a lot of people realize that it is. Even the vast majority of my graphics I've learned to do in PowerPoint, even though I do use Photoshop for some of the more sophisticated things. I thought I'd also say one more brief word about how I got started teaching this course. First of all, when we came back off the mission field, we lost 80% of our support, and so we had to figure out a way for us to survive. And I had been doing graphics for quite some time, so by that point, so I decided to try my hand at doing it freelance, and ended up doing it as a business, working for even some multi-million-dollar companies producing PowerPoints, because they're just as bad as doing them as some of the Bible teachers that I know. So I was able to the Lord used that to survive a year while we were able to put some support back together. But then I realized that since I had this ability to do this that I had developed over time, it was also a way to have a ministry, not only teaching Bible teachers and pastors, but it actually started out in the Philippines, where we were using it as an outreach. And in fact, the last time, or a couple years ago, I was at the Philippines, and we decided to offer it to non-Christians. We went to a trade school, a tech school, Polytech school of engineers. We had about 100 students, and I had like 3 hours to show them how to begin to develop graphics. And so I would tell them why I made a slide from a design perspective the way I did, and then I would explain what the slide meant. So I used it as a teaching tool, but more than that, used it as a means of evangelism in a place where you would otherwise never have any opportunity to get the gospel. So that's kind of how that got started. And then some Word of Life staff and others were interested as well. So that's kind of how all this got started a few years ago, and then I continued to develop it from there. So we may have time to talk a few things about some of the technicalities of PowerPoint, but more we're looking at design. One of the things about design is that if you have designs that are fairly high quality, that tends to reflect on the quality of your overall content, whether you realize it or not. If you have great content but poor graphic quality, then people are going to assume things that may not be true about your content. And if you have great looking graphics, you may get away with lesser content simply because people think you know what you're doing. So anyway, the point is that you have good that are both. This is part of a section, or actually a series, on 7 Marks of a Disciple based upon Mark Bailey's book, 7 Marks of a Disciple. And these are some of the title slides that I used for that. And you've got to put the Got to get all of your technology working together or it doesn't work. So these are various slides that were tied together, and what you will see is that there is continuity of both color. They're a little bit more muted, but there's also continuity of lettering between the subtitle and the title. It's that continuity that helps visually tie things together. So if you're doing slides with different sections, that's always something good to keep in mind. Complete surrender to the cross of Christ. Supreme and incomparable love for the Lord Jesus Christ. And as you can see, once again, you can find all kinds of pictures on the internet. Some have been, are really, really good. Some need to be modified a little bit. One of the things that I did here that you wouldn't necessarily notice, but I created, this is another place where I created a section or an area for my title. Actually, this painting goes all the way down to the bottom. In fact, I can show you what this actually looks like to begin with by moving this, my gradient off to the side. See, it goes all the way to the bottom. So obviously it doesn't look the same. So what you do is you create a place for your subtitle. And those are little tricks of the trade that you can do along the way. Same thing, in each one of them I've created an area for my titles and subtitles that would not otherwise exist. So these are all part of that same series.
So did you make the picture gradient, or did you add actually a gradient overlay?
I made a gradient overlay. I went from a fully transparent to a black overlay, and then you can adjust the angle and how much you want to be, what percentage you want it to be. And actually you can have an infinite number of midpoints as well. You might have it like 3/4 of the way down, it be completely transparent, and then just the last 1/4. So you can have all those kinds of adjustments. These are some other things that you can do as far as creating backgrounds. Just some, again, the main thing is to use your imagination and think of kinds of things that you can use for backgrounds. I did a couple of things here, as you notice. Let me back up a little bit and show you what I actually did. So I brought on the individual pictures one at a time, and then I took a picture of all those pictures, and then I added a blur. So now the background is not competing with the foreground. That's an important point. And then I found this cool graphic that stands for all the different religions of the world, and decided to rotate it. And so you have it sitting on top of the blurred images. So and then just added the rotation, 360-degree rotation, continuous, repeat until end of slide. Those are kinds of things that you can do. It's really, a lot of these things are really very simple. If you don't know how to do them, you can, let me say this, if you can think of something that you would like to do in PowerPoint, you can probably find a YouTube video that tells you how to do something to just see if it can even be done. Little things that sometimes people don't think of, using white, but then adding a black outline around the letter to make it stand out. Little things that you can do to make things stand out. Let's assume, for example, you're going to do something like create a brochure to the Philippines. I go to the Philippines every year. not on vacation, unfortunately, to work, but if you had the task, if you were working for a travel agency and you wanted to create a brochure, again, this is not just for PowerPoint, but if you're going to create a brochure or if you were going to create a PowerPoint, what would you do to add some information to your brochure or to your PowerPoint? Well, there are a couple of things that you could do. One, you could use just text to communicate reasons why people would want to visit the Philippines. And this is what a lot of people will do. They just think of text. Sunsets are beautiful, the scenery is incredible, the people are friendly, and the food is delicious. And all of those things are true. However, they're not as effective in communicating a message, whether it be for a brochure for the Philippines or it be a brochure for your upcoming vacation Bible school. There's other things that you can do where you can combine both pictures and text and do it in a creative way that will be much more impactful. So what would be something that we might do? You take the same content and you do something very simple like this. Same words, but you use pictures as well as text to create it, and you find that it's much, much more effective in communicating exactly the same message. So this takes time to learn to do this, but again, you don't necessarily have to be a graphic artist to do this. You just have to be able to recognize things that look good. So again, if I'm lacking ideas, which is 99% of the time, if I'm lacking a place to start, I go to the internet and I just look at hundreds, sometimes thousands, and you can scroll through thousands of pictures all at once, and then something will catch your eye and you think, that is the perfect way to do this. You may not be able to come up with, you may not feel like you're very creative in coming up with some idea on your own. That's fine. Use somebody else's idea. You don't have to copy it exactly. And again, as long as you're not using it for the purposes of resale and making money off what you're doing, then there's really quite a bit of flexibility on use of copyright, and you're not going to get into legal problems. Working with images. We are going to get into a little bit of the technical things on working with images, things that people don't realize that you can do in PowerPoint. So I'm going to step out of the presentation mode of PowerPoint and show you what you can do with PowerPoint. So you can crop an image. Crop means to cut an image to various shapes. Now, if you go to Format here at the top, you will see Crop over here on the side. So I've selected this one. There's a little drop-down arrow here, Crop to Shape. And there are all kinds of shapes that you will see that you can crop to. This is just a very, very simple thing that you can do, but you might find that there are very useful things that you can do to an image that can be done in PowerPoint that you would think I'm going to have to learn another program to do. And no, you're not necessarily going to need to do that. And there's some really strange shapes that you will never use most of the time, but it may be something that would be helpful for you. Let me go on to the next image. Everybody knows who that is, right? Kate. Kate, yes. And so you may wonder, how do I create a vignette? Do I have to be an artist to create a vignette? Is there anything I can do in PowerPoint? Actually, it's a lot simpler than you would think that it would be. Things that you would think that you would have to know Photoshop to do, you can actually do in PowerPoint. So the first thing you would do is select the image, go to Format, go to Crop. Hang on, I clicked the wrong button. Crop to Shape. Okay, you're going to crop to a circle. Now, because the circle is going to follow the contour, whatever your overall shape is. So if it were a square, if the picture were a square, it would crop to a circle. So it's going to crop in a circular fashion in proportion to the shape that it is. So you crop to a circle and you get that. And then, and I know you won't remember all this stuff, I'm just giving you ideas of things that you can do within PowerPoint. And then, let's see here. There are various artistic effects that you can use that you may or may not want to use. Different things. But how do you get the soft edge? All right. Go to Picture Layout. Then you see soft edges. So if you go to Picture Layout, see down here in the corner, under these various picture things, there's a little box down here. Click on that. It will give you these various format picture options. So you can create a shadow, you can create a reflection, you can create a glow, or you can create a soft edge. And you can go to the size of the soft edge, and now you have a vignette. It's really only 2 steps. You would think that this would take you a long time to learn how to do it, and it'll take, you won't remember all this, I understand that. But my point is to just alert you to the fact that there are so many more things that you can do in PowerPoint than you probably ever thought were possible that can make things really helpful when you're dealing with pictures. Another thing that you run into when you're dealing with pictures are pictures that have poor colors, whether they be oversaturated, undersaturated. Saturated means the colors are too bright, or they're overexposed, or they're underexposed. You can see here, this picture, when it was taken, it was overexposed. The colors are too bright, they don't look right, they don't look natural. So you click on the picture, and you go to Corrections, and then you have all kinds of exposures here to work with that change the color of the picture. You can lighten it, you can darken it. There's all kinds of things you can do with the picture to make it work better. You have color. You can actually recolor it. You can make it black and white if you want. Maybe in some case you might. You may want to make it a particular color, make the whole thing a particular color. In this case, I actually desaturated it, took some of the color out. To go the other extreme, you can see what happens if you really increase the color. So these are some things you can do. So there's even some basic color correction you can do if pictures aren't exactly right within PowerPoint. All right, another thing that you can do is colorizing for effect. This is from my course on God's Plan Through the Ages. And I wanted to create a background, but the background has so much color in it, it kind of gets in the way when you're trying to communicate a message. So what I decided to do was to, well, let me just go ahead back in here, was to desaturate. We talked about saturating and desaturating, or colorizing, for my later slides in the same series. So that was my title slide for the section. I decolorized or colorized to a flat color, and I'll show you how to do that. So you have a color. It may take me a second to figure out where to get to that picture. So again, format, color. I want to change it to just a solid background color of some kind. Usually darker is going to be better for what you're going to be doing. So again, things that you would think would take multiple steps and you have to know a lot about PowerPoint actually is pretty simple. Yes, sir?
So you're doing all this image manipulation in PowerPoint?
It's all being done in PowerPoint.
So you import the image and then you do it like that? It probably just saves a lot of steps and makes things easier, huh?
Yeah. Things that you would normally, even in earlier versions of PowerPoint, things that you would have to know how to do, photo manipulation programs and all these kinds of things, they can all be done in actually only 1 or 2 clicks in PowerPoint.
It keeps you from buying 2 programs and it keeps you from having to learn how to use 2 different programs as well, right?
Right.
What version is this?
I'm using version 365, which is a subscription version, so I pay $100 a year for it. So it's a lot of money, I admit, but almost everything is moving to the subscription model now. Fewer and fewer programs can you buy just a standalone program, pay it once, and then another 2 years down the road they come out with a new version you pay another $250 for. So this is the subscription model. I think it's it updates it continually. As soon as they have updates, they'll have multiple updates a year, and you'll have all the new features all the time. Yeah.
If you take a copyrighted photo, like that one was Greg Olson's Jerusalem, I think, when Jesus is looking up to the temple, and you manipulate it and you overlay with other photos, does that alleviate any copyright issues?
It's not that alleviates the copyright issues, because if I were trying to sell it, even if I've done all those things to it, I'd have the same problem. It's using it in an educational context that alleviates most of the copyright issues. As long as you're using it for education and you're not making a profit on it specifically by selling it. If you were to put it on a book cover, then you would have to go to the author or the copyright holder. Now and we'll talk about where to get photos. You can use these but there are also places where you can get these things and have licenses involved.
If you're
Yeah.
using it for your Sunday school class, you can use just about anything you want.
Yes. Yeah. Some of this stuff is going to get kind of technical, but it's not that I'm thinking that you're going to remember how to do it. The more important thing is you know that it can be done, and then you can go find out how to do it, okay? I'm not expecting you to remember some of this stuff, because it would take hours of hands-on practice to figure out, for me to teach you actually how to make all this stuff work. The fact that you know that it can be done and it can be done within PowerPoint, that's my goal right now. All right, so here is a situation, again, from the same course, God's Plan Through the Ages. This is the picture in the background is the Judean wilderness. And so the children of Israel were wandering in the Judean wilderness for 40 years. And so I thought, well, it would be nice to have something with the law of the 10 Commandments laying over it, but I didn't want it just sitting on there. I just wanted the transparency of it. So here's what I did. And I actually put the steps. So I found an image. I copied it to the clipboard. In fact, let me create another one here. So, copied it to the clipboard. Then whoops, sorry. So then I'm going to draw. I'm going to draw a shape. I'm going to fill the shape with the, set the fill to the clipboard. And I think I'm going to run into trouble right off the bat. I'll tell you what, this is going to get too complex very quickly, so we'll just skip this one and move on to using infographics. Infographics are images that can be used to communicate a lot of information in a short amount of time and in a small amount of space. These have become very popular in the past few years because you can see a lot of information at a glance. Now obviously for a PowerPoint presentation these are fairly complex, more complex than you would normally use, but because they incorporate graphics and numbers and proportions, sometimes you can get away with having a fairly busy slide. Let me get one that's not quite so busy. So here you see an infographic, Giants of the Southern Seas. So you see relative sizes of various whales and animals in that category as compared to a ship. So you can just very quickly start seeing things that that would take a while to communicate with just numbers. Here's an infographic that works very, very well. If you look at 2011, the population of the world was 7 billion people roughly. I don't know who does that counting, but roughly 7 billion people. In 2050, it's estimated that there will be 10 billion people. Just with a quick graphic, you can get a feel for what this means, how many more people are going to be on the same size planet. This talks about the relative users of Facebook versus other social media. So you see that Facebook dwarfs, very quickly you see that Facebook dwarfs all other media. Even Twitter, which is used a lot, it's still not even a comparison. So you can think of any number of ways of communicating information involving numbers by using relative sizes of graphics along with the numbers to communicate various things, whether it be Old Testament, New Testament, writings of Paul versus how much Luke wrote. Luke actually makes up more text than all of the writings of Paul together. So you could show that very quickly with a graphic. This is something that I used for a couple of years, an infographic that I used to quickly communicate to my supporting churches and supporters the ministry that we had been involved with over about a 15-month period. So they can see very, very quickly at a glance using an infographic things, if you just talk about them, the impact isn't there. So I found icons that sort of represented what we were doing. So 10 countries, 8 states, 25 airports, 74 flights, 11 schools. You start putting those things together and people start feeling like that what they're involved with is something that is making a difference. Rather than just talking about raw numbers, they can start seeing this thing at a glance and you realize, wow, this, you're part of something that the Lord is using, and it makes an effective way to use an infographic when you're presenting your ministry. All right, where to get images? There are three primary ways. Most of the time you'll probably get them from a search on the internet, and again, unless you're using them for resale, then they will be free. However, there are places out on the internet, Deposit Photo and Shutterstock and tons of others that actually have photos for sale. And if you're going to be doing a book cover or something that we will be selling, then you will need to buy the picture, and the use of the picture determines how much it's going, the size of the picture and the use of the picture determines the cost that you're going to pay for that image. So let's say if you're using something that amounts to a 3x5 image and you're going to do less than 10,000 copy run of 10,000, then you're only going to pay a certain amount. But then if you start getting into higher numbers and higher resolution pictures, then you're going to get into what are called extended licenses, which, you know, you're getting up into 100,000 runs, which probably most of us aren't doing books with 100,000 runs. But in case you happen to really come up with a really good one, where you're producing a lot, there are those that are available. And then, of course, you can take your own pictures. What I have found over the years, traveling countries all over the years, I've stopped taking pictures. Honestly, unless it's a picture of an individual person that I want in a picture, the pictures that somebody else has already taken out there that are done by professional photographers, they always look better than anything I can possibly take, no matter what kind of camera, because I'm just not that good, and most people aren't that good. There are people, there are now, if you can think of it, and if you can think of a place in the world, there's already a great picture of it. I can almost 100% guarantee you. And if you're really good with Photoshop, you can just stick the person in this really good picture, and then you'll be all right. All right, number three, understand your fonts. This is where things really go south quickly sometimes. As you've noticed in most of the things that I've shown you today, I've only used a couple or three fonts at most on any given slide. Again, one of the rules that we talked about yesterday was you don't do it just because you can, all right? So I put together several different font rules to keep in mind. First is know the basic typefaces. There are different typefaces. You may not have thought about this before, but there are various typefaces out there, and they each have their own usage. First, there are serif fonts. Serif is the little technical term for that little mark at the end of each letter. So the S with a little mark at the top and the bottom on each end, that is a serif. On the T, on the F, etc. Obviously the O doesn't have serifs. So the serifs are these little marks on the end of letters. Notice that these letters do not have serifs. So they are called what? Non-serif fonts. It's really complicated, right? Okay. Now, there are all kinds of serif fonts. There's a place for everything. Some work better in certain contexts than they do in others. Some work well together. Most of the time, you're using a mixture of serif and non-serif fonts. You seldom use a mixture of multiple types of serif fonts together because it starts looking very complicated. So those are serif fonts. These are sans serif fonts, sans meaning without. And as you can see, there are all kinds. And there are literally thousands of different, of each of the kinds of fonts that are out there. Thousands of serif fonts, thousands of non-serif, or sans serif fonts. There are fonts that are primarily good for titles and aren't good for much else. Unfortunately, sometimes people will use title fonts when they should be using something other than a title font. A title font is generally, although not always, a sans serif font, and it's usually bolder than other fonts. There are a few serif fonts here, but not too many. These are different kinds of title fonts. Very, very seldom would you ever want to have very much text on your slide using that font. It gets very annoying very, very quickly. One of the things that you don't want to do to be an effective teacher is to annoy your audience any more than necessary. Sometimes just our voice alone is enough to annoy people. So we want to do as few things as possible to annoy our audience. Then there are script fonts. You didn't realize there were so many fonts out there, did you? So now, then there's another type of font called a script font. Fonts that either look like, well, there's actually yet another type of script font. These are obviously not simply to emulate handwritten fonts, unless you happen to be really, really good at calligraphy. Most of your calligraphy fonts are not going to look like this. You have to be really, really good to pull this off. There is a place, but a limited place. There's a use for these, but it's a limited use. Overuse of these does not work. And you can also see that if you tried to use these in all caps, how well would they work? Wouldn't work at all. So some things will work with all caps, some things won't work at all with all caps. And then you have handwriting fonts. So some are more formal than others, obviously. This is a fairly formal font, the kind that you would expect to be on an architectural drawing, somebody who's learned not only to draw buildings, but also knows how to draw letters well, in addition to the buildings. Others are less formal, and there are ones that are even far less formal than these. The less formal they are, the harder they are to read, which means the less you want to use them. These are the kinds of things, these specialty fonts are fonts that you want to use very, very sparingly. Again, we don't do it just because we can. Then beyond those specialty fonts, there's some really specialty fonts that really don't fall exactly into any other category. So a stencil font, a font that sort of mimics a Hindi script, something that sort of, in its own way, mimics a Chinese brushstroke. And there are Arabic-looking scripts, Hebrew-looking scripts, as you see. Jerusalem, obviously those are not Hebrew letters, but they are designed to sort of look like Hebrew letters, and in the right place you can use those. This one up here, for example, looks like a typewriter that needs to be replaced, right? And in the right situation, there is a place to use that. Now, almost never, ever use these fonts. Say with me, I promise, I will never, ever use these fonts. Almost. Thank you, Rick. Almost never use these fonts. Now, there are certain situations where you're trying to achieve a specific look. But you have to admit, it has to be very specific that you're trying to achieve. Probably the font among these that is most often used, and the one I most often violate, is this one. Yes, yes, yeah. So you don't have to tell me all your guilty, all the things you're guilty of. Yeah, so I'm not, so that's why I said almost never. Now, there are two up here that get used the most and should be used among the least. Besides this one, what is the second most often used one? Yeah. Algerian, one, it doesn't look that good. Two, it only comes in caps, which makes it inherently difficult to read right off the bat. Jokerman, it has to be a joke, right? Okay. Again, there are certain uses, but they would be very, very limited for most of these.
I think we're all captivated by those, though.
Yes, yeah. By how bad they are? Yeah. So why would anybody design that? All right, so that was font rule number 1. Know your fonts. Know your fonts. Font rule number 2. Generally, on any given slide, on any given book cover, on any poster, on any brochure, generally, all rules are made to be broken, right? Except the ones that the police enforce, which we don't ever break, right? Use only 2 to 3 fonts. So, generally reserve 1 font for the title. Now, the title would be the third one. The title type font would be the third one that you would generally use. The other 2, 1 or 2 fonts, you would use in the body of the text. Use a second font for primary content. Avoid using 3 fonts if you can. Sometimes it makes sense to use 3 fonts. A third font could be used for a subpoint. So notice what I've done here. One of the things that you don't see here that many people use, and I think this may be on a later slide, but in addition to the promise that you're never going to use the special, those really weird fonts most of the time, there's another promise that you have to make, and that is, I will never, if at all possible, ever use bullet points. Uh-oh. Okay, now think about this. Why do we use bullet points? We use bullet points to set apart points. But if you're using colors and fonts correctly, then that accomplishes what the bullet point accomplishes without cluttering up your slide with something else on the slide that you don't need. Seriously. Look at this. We have a title. We have 2 points and a subpoint. No what? No bullet points. And what have we accomplished? It's very clear that what the structure is, right? It's accomplished both by using a different font and a different color. Adding a font, adding a bullet point accomplishes nothing except to clutter the slide. And most of our slides are what? Too cluttered anyway, right? Now, how many people now have been stabbed in the heart and are going to go home and rework all of their points? What's that?
We use bullet points with the Census Bureau. We do training at the Census Bureau all over the United States. And, you know, it's bullet point, and it's, you know, it's really busy and
It's really busy.
really, really busy. Like
Right.
Ed Sullivan used to say, really, really busy.
Really, really busy. And it becomes tedious, becomes hard to follow. And again, if you're using colors and font types, and sizes, notice what I've done here. There are several things, and then we'll take a break. There are several things that are being done. One, there are 3 colors for the fonts. So your title is one color. Your one level of font is a different color. Plus, you've gone from using a sans serif title to a serif level, and then to a non-serif font that's just a slightly different color. Subtle is usually better. It's not a lot bigger, it's not a lot smaller, but it's just enough that, what's it do? It helps your eye follow the information without cluttering the slide. Okay? Now that you're all ready to kill the presenter, go get a cup of coffee.